projects at work. So thank you so much. Fletcher, maybe you want to take Pata's seat and...
No,
or you're okay there. Okay. And I just wanted to say, by way of introduction, I mean, I have said that Fletcher is a research fellow at ODI, and he's also the director of this Mwanachi program, but he's a social anthropologist by training, and he has also done a lot of work on donor and developing country practices on aid effectiveness and domestic accountability. So,
good.
Over to you.
Thank you. I hope it's working. Yeah. As already introduced, I'm a research fellow here at ODI. I'm working on this program, Mwanachi, which is a Swahili word meaning ordinary citizen. It was coined not at ODI, but amongst partners. It's in Africa. The program is Africa focused, 7 African countries, deliberately selected for their complexity, diversity in governance context. So you've got Ghana on one hand, where after elections they shake hands, I believe they said so. And then you have on the other side, Southern Sudan, which they're having their independence on 9th of July, but still with a lot of issues in there. And in between, you've got a number of countries. So you've got Sierra Leone post-conflict, then Malawi, Zambia, Uganda, Ethiopia. Ethiopia is an interesting one with a law that bans organizations funding advocacy work for more than 10% of those that are internally in Ethiopia. If they get anything more than 10% of their income, they are deemed not to be local because they are influenced by the money that they are receiving from external sources. So they cannot do advocacy work. And though also it is quite very, very federal system of governance, unlike the other African countries. So all those we were selected to give us opportunities of learning on what works in each of the contexts. Just like Christian Aid, we also have just had our midterm review. It was done by our Social Development Direct, led by Jenny Chapman, and then also Antonella Mancini. Some of you might know those names, and 2 other researchers in the countries. They selected 3 countries for field visits: Malawi, Ghana, and then Uganda, and the others were involved in the learning reviews. So what I'm going to share here is kind of a reflection on that midterm review, but also my own, because I'm actually just coming from Uganda. Last week I was there. I was also in Zambia. I keep interacting with these communities and projects. Being ODI, the setup was starting with where we had to interact with the organizations in country to try to see what the kind of change they are looking for. I'm just quoting one of it here. The broad change is citizens' voices resulting into better state accountability and responsiveness. That's kind of a broad, GTF aim. But in Uganda, for instance, they have uninformed, and they are looking for an informed and civically competent citizenry that relates to leaders from a position of power and empowerment. Objective reasoning, informed citizen choices of leaders at different levels, a mechanism of sustained dialogue on conversations between citizens and leaders, a politically cautious and proactive citizenry that effectively participates in democratization processes, and then a people-centered political system and leadership that are responsive to citizens' demands and priorities. So if you look at this, this is kind of at the top civil society manifesto, where they call it Citizens Manifesto. Is an urge for citizens to engage more. And you can understand why, because most of African countries, these cycles of multi-party democracy have produced a lot of voter apathy, as well as citizen apathy generally to what governments do, mainly because of the winner-takes-all mentality, where when you are in the losing camp, you almost will not see a school being constructed until there is other forms of manipulation that happen, which then play also into the same government that is in power. So people find it difficult when they vote and they find they can't push through what they want, and so there is generally an apathy. But civil society have been working now very quite actively to regenerate that effort to engage in government. in terms of the theory of change itself for ourselves, we thought how to get there in terms, having interacted with organizations, we thought of three things. The first was to work with what we use this term, interlocutors of citizen-state relations. Those that can change the rules of the game. They can change, they can tip the balance of power. They can work out there in working with citizens as well as in working with government. From the starting point, we thought a number of civil society organizations are doing this, but also media, and then elected representatives, mainly parliamentarians and councillors, but also traditional leaders. And then the issue was more like the previous two presentations I've said, looking for collaboration, looking for synergies in working amongst different partners. And then the other thing was use of evidence. You see whether use of evidence, can change power relations, can help to change different power relations. We started off starting with what we call using a word governance assessment, which helps to map out the different perceptions of governance in country amongst different arenas. So around civil society, government itself, in terms of how they see their everyday experience of governance or decisions that are being made, other than that which is written. So we got a lot of understanding maybe out of that. I mean, I should say out of that, one of the things that came out through was the issue of not being able to, there's a lot of consultation, heavy consultations happening in countries, but not beyond that point where then they can inform policy processes and then being able to monitor what that policy is. And then again, the policy process itself, policy should be located. It shouldn't be celebrated, especially in Africa, because you can have a policy, but actions don't necessarily follow the policy lines. They follow a lot of other lines, intuition, relations, and all that. So it's a lot of informal ways in which you act. So if you put your eye only on policy, you might not really progress much. And then also there was an issue to do with interest aggregation, where the interests of citizens being articulated by members of parliament and then all councillors for the local councils and parliaments for the national parliament, how they aggregated the common issues around not being able to see parliamentarians come back until the next election. This is an issue that we know very well of, that the interaction between parliamentarians and citizens is often around campaigning and not beyond that. Just speaking on those, the other thing that I wanted to say, that a typical project, a Mwanachi typical project, one is issue-based. So we kind of worked out all this, tried to look at the evidence and said, what are the two things that you want to focus on? So you can learn from it. So in Sierra Leone, for instance, they chose to work on youth and women. And that was the issue they wanted. In Uganda, they wanted to work more on chronically poor, chronic poverty, but around services. In Malawi, they wanted to work more around access to justice and around engaging representatives. In Zambia, they wanted to work more on disability, but also around how disability works into policy. In Ghana, they wanted to work more on information. Information as an issue, as a power issue, other than just an information sharing per se. How, if you work more on information, you can unlock certain forms of engagement. So that's what they wanted to look at. So you had all these kind of issues come up. So what we've done in the end is we are supporting a few a maximum of 10 projects to work on those issues, led by one organization. In the first phase, it has mainly been civil society, although the medium review challenged us on that why is it we see more civil society than the other actors also leading, and partly was because of the granting system tended to be so biased towards certain forms of registration, and that meant other organizations couldn't come in. But at the moment we are readdressing that to see whether we can bring in other actors who may not very much score on those. And so we have a maximum of about 10, and each one of them is supported by intensive capacity development from ourselves, from local actors, and from on analysis of the political situation, as well as in what a process we call outcome mapping. What they do, let me explain this, is that once they form a theory of change, so how does change happen in this place? And then they would say, for instance, if I take an organization in Madden in Uganda, they're looking at improving quality of education for for children, basically, in primary schools, in 8 primary schools. And then if that is the change they are looking for, then they try to locate to say, how does change happen? Who is immediately involved in this change? And they would say the pupils themselves, we want them to be part of this. And then we have the teachers, and then we have the parents. But then they look at which are the ways in which we could engage each one of these. And then in some cases, there are already structures available, but then they question them whether they're actually useful structures. So around teachers, for instance, there are school management, around parents, for instance, school management committees, which are then linked into village health committees, linked to area development committees. But their own assessment was that they are not really useful. They have been over-politicized. And so they created what they call reflect circles, which brings in participants from these different committees together to assess the quality of education for their children, and then feeding back into the same committees where they exist. But I must say that that's another issue which I might raise later on, that is the issue on how do you raise issues that are localized and how they become big issues at the top. And then they look at the children. The children side, they find, oh, children are, we have 2,000 children in this school, but they cannot speak all of them in one voice. So they created, if we had a slide, I was going to show you a box, called a suggestion box, but with a children's club of about 9 children who facilitate in initiating children and say whatever they want to say about their teacher, about the school, and then they put in that box. At first it was put near the office of the school, no one put in, but now any suggestion, because they were afraid they might be noticed that someone is putting it there. So they put it away somewhere, and then they go and put in those suggestions. And then the school, another independent person comes, so the organization comes, and they hold the key. So they come and open, the children read the issue, those in the club read the issues, and they see in the presence of the head teacher, and some teachers, and also school management committees. And then those issues are taken to the relevant committees or authorities to be addressed. So that's a system that they have developed that enables children to have a say on what their project needs, that surrounds their issues. And they've been addressing a number of them. So for instance, the punishments that children have, things like those that distract, so children are seen as if are going to school, actually they are not learning, which is quite, in a number of those things may it look small, but when you look at the top and you see Uganda has free education, you might imagine everyone is learning. When in fact, when days come to everyday practice, the quality of education is affected in many ways. So the same happens in different other countries. So what we've done is, in each project, they locate who are the key actors that they need, but they also set up what is the best behavior they are looking for from each one of these actors. So from MPs, from media, and they say, we want an MP to be able to take these issues to the parliament and be able to discuss them and be able to give feedback. But what they notice also is that where the MP is at the moment is not at that desired behavior. So we said, okay, the methodology asks them to set up what would be the progress markers, some things that they want to see early in this actor's behavior. Say, for instance, attend meetings, even if they haven't said anything, and then progressively move towards more transformed forms of behavior. So we do that, and they do that, and then now what we're also doing is trying to understand the decision logics around these actors, so around MPs, around media, so that they understand more clearly what makes media act in one way other than the other, what makes MPs act in one way other than the other, what makes traditional leaders act in one way other than the other. So they also, exploring that decision patterns around these actors, but around a specific issue. And then beyond that, we also explore, are there bigger issues here? So for instance, is it not really the MP, but the political party dynamic, the political party which they belong to, and the manifestos, the way they have set and debated, and the way maybe the constitution, it says, or is it a policy? And then various elements of this are then understood and unpacked, so that then we come back to the bigger governance picture, and then in the way it informs these particular very specific intervention mechanisms that we have. So what we have learned, basically, I know I would have shared a number of case studies, but for the sake of time, I will not really share them, but just come back to what we have learned. First of all, the clear theory of change. What is the change they're looking for? Now, these organizations tend to work on so many things, and sometimes things can be so interlinked and so intermeshed. Of course, that's how life happens. It's not very compartmentalized. You can't put in compartments like this. You are one time a farmer, at another time you're a teacher, you're working one side. So we understand why that happens. But in this case, we ask them to kind of narrow it down to some few things that would work. That has helped us quite well in trying to track down and show some results, because on the other hand, we have to be knowledgeable that donors are funding us. We need to see school children in class. We need to show results that what has been delivered, and that's how DFID wants to see us, because that one, if you feature it, here you can show it in a parliament maybe and say so many children in school. You can't just show these processes. So we're conscious of that. The other thing is the process of re-energizing communities is very key, because communities know a lot than program managers and projects do. And we need to find as many ways in which those mechanisms of voice are supported, and then they come through. And then that links also to being able to create dialogue platforms, the issue that my colleagues showed. Now, this dialogue platform bring in both the supply and the demand side, where you bring in, a lot of people who work in the local government are very willing, although they might not want their names to be named, to say it's me who came there. But they're very willing to release information. That's another way. When we were talking about information, I presented last time, a previous presenter, it's not necessarily written information. There's a lot of non-information, a lot of other things that are needed for engagement to happen. And then also the issue of directional accountabilities. Accountabilities of actors like MPs are not only one-sided. There are multiple accountability. One hand, they have to be accounting to their constituency, because they know it's a bargain of some kind. It's not that they totally ignore. And then they also account to their party, they account, so many multiple accountabilities that balance each other off. We've got to understand that. And then managing politics, that one is something that is very key and very underlining in the particular patterns, the preoccupations in the ruling parties and the parties that are associated with change, as opposition. In Malawi, for instance, at the moment, there are big issues. The university has just been in 3 months or 4 months of closure in Malawi at the moment. And I'm part of, being part of civil society, you want to see what is civil society saying and how you're mobilizing around it. And because power is with the president, who decides, also the chancellor of the university, there is so much that is difficult for civil society. There's one which tried to say something, they have been stigmatized, and a lot of, so it's a dangerous game to engage. And then the issue of coalition building, which the others have mentioned before. So those are some of the things that I can say work. In the interest of time, I know that I might say some other things in the course of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Fletcher. Thank you very much. Sorry to have to cut you short, but
no problem.